Good morning and welcome to our March edition of our PBIS Leaders Network. We're glad you guys are all here. We have some great content for you today, some updates and some great presentations from some local schools that I think are going to be great for you to hear. We are recording, so be aware that we are recording this session and it will be available then after our meeting this morning. If you'd like to go back, or if there are folks here that you know that want the content and they weren't able to be here this morning, we are recording. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Stacy, who is going to talk about our Bitly and get us started with our first activity this morning.
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see so many people here today. As Heidi said, we have a Bitly, so if you'd like to follow along with the slides, it's there on the screen, and we've also dropped it in the chat for you, so you can just click that link and follow along. So as we get started today, we always like to start with a little activity. And, you know, PBIS team, we talk a lot about taking care of yourself, and we thought, why not food? What's the best comfort food? So I happened to come across an article that talked about, you know, times have been tough, and as we're having a rough day, we kind of start to think about dinner. We start to think about going home and what are we going to have for dinner? What sounds good? And it's really that comfort food idea. So what's your favorite comfort food? If you want to drop it in the chat, we thought it would just be fun to see what's people's favorite comfort food. And this article I found gave the top 25, and it was really deep research. Someone just did in their office, but it was kind of interesting that sweets didn't make the list till about halfway down, and it was mainly carbs, you know, grilled cheese, mac and cheese, pizza, all those good things like that. So your best comfort food, and if your best comfort food's at a restaurant, feel free to share a restaurant with us. We'd love to hear that as well. So that's just kind of our, oh, I see all kinds of things. Pasta, chips and salsa. I love chips and salsa. Noodles. All right. Noodles, oh, it is. It's lots of carbs, right? So when we're having a tough day, carbs are calling our name, I guess. So, you know, we really do need to take care of ourselves. And if food helps you with that, then find yourself a good carb to have, I guess, right? All right. So we're looking forward to our last meeting already. I can't believe we're talking about our final meeting of the year. And we would really like to get your input, because our intention is our last meeting is April 20th. And we're going to focus on district PBIS leadership teams and have some different districts that are going to come share. And we have kind of a panel approach to that. But we did want to get your input. We know we've done all of these networks virtually, but we were curious if there was anybody that would like to come in person. So we would love to be able to offer this panel in our last session in person live, but we want to get your input. So Heidi's going to launch a poll, and we just like you to answer the question so we know what's the majority. Would the majority of people like to come in person? And we were looking at probably about a 2-hour session, or would you prefer to do virtual? So if you could go ahead and just answer in the poll, that would be awesome. See, lots of people are putting in their votes. Appreciate that. So you prefer in person or virtual, whichever you prefer. Give it another couple seconds here for people to go ahead and enter. If you prefer in person or virtual.
It looks like it's almost like a tie right now. We were hoping to get people kind of together, and maybe there's a hybrid approach that we could, if it's really kind of split, but we'll take a look at that. So if you're still haven't voted, we're going to ask you go ahead and get in there and vote. We really wanted to have at least one, as Stacy said, one session in person so we could be kind of together. But it looks like we're kind of split. So I guess our PBIS team will have to kind of talk about that and see what that means. You guys have made it really difficult because it's not overwhelming in one way or the other. So I'm going to go and end the poll. And it looks like that we have almost a split. So we'll have to go back to our team and talk about what are the options for that.
Okay.
So thank you for participating, and maybe there's a way, maybe there's really a way. I I myself do not like to do that hybrid because I don't like that. I'm good with technology, but I don't like that technology in the room that we have to use. But maybe there's something that we can talk about, we can offer.
Yep, we'll have to look into that. All right. Well, today our agenda, we just wanted to share with you. Of course, we're going to start with a few updates. We're looking at a couple of changes with EMIS and then recognition. Then we are going to look at assessment tools that you can be using for your framework. Then we do have some district presentations. That's really been a highlight this year as districts are sharing what they're doing in their buildings, their districts. And then of course, we'll end with some time for networking. So I'm going to pass this over to Heidi and she's going to share a few updates.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. So this slide here shows you guys a reminder about your PBIS implementation reporting. And I have to be honest, when I received this update, I did not realize that you guys are entering your PBIS implementation through EMIS twice a year. That was new to me, and I'm not sure if all teams knew that, but it was new to me. So what we know is that emails are sent to the superintendent and anybody else who is designated to report your implementation status for PBIS, and that's what's being reported on the report card. So the suggestion always is that your PBIS team should communicate that rating with the EMIS coordinator and designated staff to ensure that there is accurate reporting. What we are finding when we're looking at in our region is that we're not sure how accurate the reporting is because we're not sure if folks are looking at how the rubric is designed. You will report like an A through E implementation, A being at the beginning and E being completely implementing all tiers of the framework, doing fidelity measures, sustaining your work. So we're not quite sure who, when we're looking at that, the accuracy of that, because it is a self-report. So we are going to encourage teams, look at that, look at those rating scales that we have, and then report that to the EMIS person for accurate reporting. That third bullet talks about there are 2 reporting periods. And again, I did not know this. I thought it was just at the end of the year. So for 21-22, there is a mid-year reporting and the date there is January 3rd through April 29th. So we're right in the midst of that reporting period. And then there is an end of the year reporting period, and that is May 5th through July 13th. The end of the year is what is used by the Ohio Department of Education. So I'm not saying that you want to be the first one not to be accurate, but what I'm saying is that second one really should be the accurate one because that's what's going to be used by the department. And I'm making the assumption then that that is what is put on the report card. So we know that the PBIS reporting is the only measure on the report card that is self-reported. So you want to make sure that that is accurate for your building. And when the building reports that, then the district will get a rating based on what the buildings have reported. So make sure that your PBIS teams are really involved with that so that you can capture that accurate reporting. And if you don't know who is getting those emails, you may want to find that out to make sure that you have those communication lines open so that we know that we're reporting the most accurate level that we're at. We know that the end of the year appeal process closes on July 27th. So if you've made an error, you're not going to be able to make any changes after that time. So we wanted to make sure that you guys had this information because it really is important that that is being captured correctly since this is the only measure on the report card that is a self-report. So I know a lot of you are probably tuning in this morning to hear about recognition. We've been through a couple of changes this year after the application was released. So we want to make sure that you guys have the most accurate and up-to-date information as far as recognition. But before I do go forward, I'm just going to pause for a minute in case there are any questions regarding the reporting about your implementation status for PBIS. And I'll just stop talking for a second in case there's a question. You can pop it in the chat or unmute. It doesn't look like there's anything. When we get to the end of our meeting this morning, if anybody has a question, please feel free to stay on and we're happy to talk to anyone about questions. So we are now in the midst of application season. Many of the consultants are already knowing but this because we are in the buildings and doing TFIs, which is really exciting. We've seen some really cool things, but we want to kind of remind you about recognition process. We thought that the recognition process was actually going to change this year, but we talked to folks at the state level and they have agreed to not change it this year. What I will tell you is there is going to be major changes next year to the recognition process. The recognition process is going to be changing as far as your evidence is going to be concerned, how it's submitted, who's going to be looking at that evidence. As far as who's doing TFIs, I'm not sure if that will change or not, but there's going to be a big change next year. So be aware that as you're preparing next year, things are going to be asked to be uploaded probably to a central location. So if you are, depending on if you're doing paper or binder, or if you're using Google or other ways to collect your evidence, it's probably not going to look the same next year. So please make sure that you are aware this year we are going to go along the same way kind of we have in the past as far as evidence gathering, although there are some changes I need to tell you about as far as the application is concerned. But as far as evidence gathering, we're going to go forward the same this year, but it is going to be different. So just prepare your teams for that. And it's going to be probably a little bit painful. So we'll try to work with you guys as we go through that process as far as upload is concerned. So if you have not yet done a tiered fidelity inventory, including that walkthrough, it's kind of late to be scheduling that, but if you still need to do that, please reach out to your consultants immediately because we are busy and our calendars are filling up. So it's really important. If you are only going for a bronze level, you can do an internal with your own team and your own person in your district TFI. However, that person needs to have access to PBIS to upload PBIS apps to upload that data. So if you're only going for bronze, you do not need an outside consultant. But if you are looking at silver or gold, you must have an outside consultant from the SST go through the process with you. And we do all 2 tiers for silver or all 3 tiers for gold, if that's what you're looking at. So you really need to reach out to those folks. Check your SST participation. That would be for silver or gold. You'll have to collect that specific evidence, which I'm going to talk a little bit about on the next slide, and then make sure that you are aware of the deadline, and that is May 1st. We are saying this year that no late applications are going to be accepted, so please make sure you are getting that in by May 1st. Because with the way contracts run and people's schedules, we need to have that stuff in, and the turnaround time to the state, we need to be able to honor that May 1st deadline. So just be aware. So there are some changes in the application. If you've applied in the past, there is a demographic page that's going to look a little different to you. The data sources are going to be a little bit different for tier 1 only. In the past, on the application form, those data sources said something like highly recommended or highly suggested. You will notice this year in tier 1, it now says required data sources that are in bolded letters. So tier 2 and tier 3 have not changed. They will be changing those next year. But for tier 1, it is now required data sources. So you need to be submitting those bolded items that say required in tier 1. If there are questions about that, you can reach out to your consultants, but you will notice on that tier 1 it's those pages that are kind of colored and associated with the levels. Those are going to look a little different to you because those items are going to be required. The school profile template is still in the application, and we're asking you to fill it out to the best of your knowledge. If it's not completely accurate, talk to your consultant about that, but we are still asking you to fill out that school profile template. They are still asking for a digital photo. Those who have applied in the past know how that works. You submit a photo to us at the SST, and you can email that to your consultant. So those are the same. What has changed is you will not need to do an impact statement as you have in the past. That has been taken off the application. And the second thing that has been taken off the application is there was a condition on there talking about disproportionality and some action steps. That is no longer on the application either. So these are really the 4 things that you see on your screen right now are really the required items. The demographic information, which is really part of the application, the data sources, which is really your evidence binder or your Google folders, your school profile template, which is really your discipline information, and then that digital team photo. So that's what they are requiring this year. On this slide, there are direct links to the building and program application, to the district application. There is an FAQ that has been put out by ODE as far as the process is concerned. So that's there. And then I would highly recommend you looking at the scoring rubrics, because that will be how your teams will be evaluated, how really the evidence is going to be evaluated. And if you're not sure about how you might score when you turn in evidence, I know we do a TFI right off the bat, but if you're not sure about the evidence that you are gathering, I would highly recommend that you look at those scoring rubrics, because that's going to tell you how the consultants are going to look at those applications and how they're going to score. So if you have access to the bit.ly, these are all live linked there. You guys can take a look at those. They're all linked on our website. You can go to our website also, sst8.org, and there is a story on that very first page. All that stuff is linked there. So those are live links for you. So I'm going to pause and ask, are there questions before we jump into our presentations for this morning? I know to my team, I think Michelle is having difficulty getting into the meeting. I know she's going to be the second presentation. So I think she may have maybe jumped on as far as a phone might be concerned, but I think she may be having issues getting into the meeting. So I'll give it a minute if anybody has questions about recognition, and just kind of try to do some technical. Michelle, are you on? Were you able to get in? I think she's in the, and she can't, okay. Okay, so Michelle is having some difficulty getting into the meeting, and I'm not sure if there's somebody that would be able to talk through the slides if she can't get in. Okay, she's running to school to try to do it at that point. When we get there, okay, I think Michelle is on, Melissa's on the phone with her. So when we get to that point, maybe we can try to do some troubleshooting there too. Questions about recognition? I'm not seeing anything.
Heidi, there's one in the chat from Scott. For the bronze level, are all bolded items required?
On the application, it says yes, all bolded items are required. Now, when we take a look at that, we may be able to score it, you know, differently. Maybe it's not a 2, but they are saying that they, the way that they're explaining it to us is, for those particular items, those are the required pieces of evidence that need to be there. And I'm not sure, I know we have other guests on our call. I don't know if there are other people that would want to speak to that, about those required pieces of evidence, but that's what they are telling us. For that particular item, those are the required items for that particular element, like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Other questions? Okay, I saw thanks. Okay, well, we'll stay on at the end again. If you guys have specific questions, you know, we usually stay on after 10 if there are people that have questions. So please feel free to reach out regarding it's the process is going to be really the same this year that what we've done in the past. Again, I would just start to prepare your teams for next year. There are going to be some major changes to the whole system. So just start to prepare your teams for that. And then again, the couple of changes that are really new this year are: 1, you don't need the impact statement; 2, the required items. The required items, the verbiage has changed as well. So if you guys are real familiar with that, you'll notice some of the items are not exactly the same as last year in the bolded. So those have changed. And then being that those are a requirement. So again, if you have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So let's go ahead and jump in to our assessment tools. We're going to have some presentations from some local schools today that we're working with that are going to be talking about how they're using the tiered fidelity inventory, the self-assessment survey and possibly some climate surveys. So when we're looking at our fidelity to PBIS, these are the things that we talk about using. One being TFI, you guys are really probably pretty familiar with that, the tiered fidelity inventory. That really is your team looking at, are we doing what we said we would do? If you're not using the self-assessment survey, we would highly recommend that you also use that survey, because that really tells you what is the staff perception of our implementation. So TFI is the team, SAS or self-assessment survey is the staff perception. And then what PBIS, the kind of the gurus are saying now is that, are you looking at staff climate? Staff climate would really be the feeling of your building. You know, how does really what is the climate of your building? And it's not exactly the same as your PBIS implementation, but do people feel safe? Do people feel welcomed? Those kinds of things. So what we suggest is that, you know, you look at some of these tools, and our teams are going to kind of talk about how they're using these tools and action plan, but these are the three that we would recommend to you. And I just pulled up a couple of things, a couple of slides just for consideration. I'm not going to talk long about them. But at the last meeting that I attended at the state level, they shared some data with us that said, if you're really using these fidelity tools, when should we really be using them? So when you're getting up and running in tier 1, you'll see what the suggestion is. You kind of look at them maybe like 3 times a year. But as you guys roll out, you start to look at your other tiers, and you don't have to do everything all at once necessarily. So I really like the slide. And then it also shows you when you might want to administer that SAS or maybe a climate survey. This is just a suggested schedule. We typically see folks doing SAS and TFI in the spring, but when you're starting, you may want to look at it a little bit more often. I think looking at SAS and TFI in the spring is great, because I think it's great for planning for the next year. But when you're getting up and running, you know, your teams may be looking at these things a little bit more often. And this is just a suggested chart to kind of show you what you might want to think about, especially as you start to roll out your other tiers. The other one I wanted to share with you is, if you're really looking at a MTSS model, this is something else that was shared at the state that I thought was kind of interesting. So if you're looking at doing your TFI, your SASs, and your climate survey, how does that look when you're looking at academic considerations? So if you're looking at this chart, we have Ames, Webb, and Dibbles, maybe Acadience you might be using in your buildings, or whatever you're using as far as your screening tools are concerned. You want to make sure that maybe you're looking at this data in comparison to some of the fidelity measures that you might be looking at. So I know we have a lot of folks that are using Acadience, and they're really doing those fall, winter, and spring benchmarks. You also would really want to look at, how could we be looking at our fidelity measures for our behavior if we're truly doing an MTSS model? That SAT 10, that is just an example from a state for their high school summative evaluation. It's like a 10th grade evaluation or 10th grade assessment. So they also want to include that in their MTSS framework. But really looking at, these are the things that you could be looking at in an MTSS framework. So, you know, I wanted to kind of throw that out at you as well, because I know a lot of you guys are entering into those MTSS discussions. I just wanted to throw those up. We're not going to, like I said, spend a long time on that, but this is the way that you should really kind of look at your assessments. And I'm going to throw it to Michelle, because we're going to talk about now how our teams are using some of these tools to do some of their action planning. So Michelle, talk to us about fidelity tools, communication, and organization.
All right. Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. So we wanted to share, we're moving into our district presentations, and we wanted to share a really great example that we have within our region of how a PBIS leadership team took those fidelity tools and really embedded them into the foundation of how they have their framework organized, as well as the communication structure with which they share out what's happening with PBIS across their program, across their building. So what you see on that slide up there on the screen are 2 examples from Akron's early learning program. They are in their 7th year of PBIS implementation and have really grown over those 7 years. But one of the examples we wanted to highlight from that program, you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide, is from their actual PBIS handbook within their program. They have structured their handbook, both for their leadership team and for staff, to be organized around the components of the tiered fidelity inventory. This has a couple of benefits, as you can imagine. When recognition time comes around each year, they already have their evidence and their process outlined within their handbook. So it's very easy for them to go in and to have that evidence already organized. Another benefit to this is that it's very easy for them to populate and update their TFI action plan as they move through the framework and as they move through the year. So they can very easily look at those TFI scores that they're scoring, very easily put next steps into their action plan and stay up to speed, both for their leadership team and so that their building understands where they're at with implementation. On the right-hand side of your slide, you'll see a monthly newsletter that the Early Learning Program puts out monthly for their building staff. And at the foundation of that newsletter every month is their data, both their behavior incident reporting data, as well as their TFI SAS data is also reported if that's relevant for that month. And they'll also insert into that any survey data that they've gotten from building staff, from families that are a part of that program. That's all at the root within that newsletter. And that newsletter is a quick one-page document that all building staff receive each month. You'll see in their January, February, they have reminders tied to the TFI. Their program walkthroughs were completed at the end of February, and they used that newsletter to prepare all of the classrooms and staff for what would happen within that walkthrough.
And Michelle, I would just add for those school age folks here that BIR data would be like their ODR or office discipline referral.
Thank you.
Because in early learning, it's a different consideration, but that would be, you could just swap out BIR for ODR if you're thinking about using something like this, if you're school age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So now we're going to move into our district presentations. We want to welcome Patty Stauffer and Jen Raymond from Akron Public Schools. They are here from Leggett CLC to share a little bit about how they're using the TFI and other fidelity tools within their building. So welcome, Patty and Jen.
Good morning. I don't know if you can see my screen or not.
Looks great.
Okay, great. All right. I've never presented on Zoom, so we use Google, so this is kind of different for us. All right, so go from here. Let me tell you a little bit about Leggett. Leggett is part of Akron Public Schools. This is our Leggett staff. Our head principal is Gregory Blondheim. I am the Dean of Students, which is a fancy name for assistant principal here in Akron. We have a full-time counselor at our building, Mr. D'Onofrio, who of course is on the PBIS team as well. We have a full-time instructional coach to support teachers as well as PBIS. We have grades K to 5 in our building. We have 17 general education classrooms with 4 self-contained units, 2 of which are autism and 2 of which are for our emotional disturbance students. We call them in Akron our NOW program. And we have 4 intervention specialists as well as our special subjects. The makeup of our building, here's a picture of our building. We are located pretty close to downtown Akron. For those of you that are familiar with the main post office, we're right by the main post office and right almost smack dab close to downtown. Currently, we have 356 kids. That does change daily. I think we got 2 new ones today, so that's going to change. Our enrollment, we are majority of African-American students there, you see, with a little mix of, we do have an Asian population, white and multi-race, and some Hispanic. Our gender is pretty close, a little more heavy on the gentlemen than females. This is our timeline that we used. We started the summer before COVID. So we were starting to implement some things that you'll see there. This is our timeline. We did our PBIS team training in the summer of 2020. We started to train the staff in August of 2020, and that was done all online. We were remote from September all the way through mid-February, beginning of March. Then as we came back to in-person learning in March, we did have some students that did remain online. So we kind of did a hybrid model. So we had to restructure our whole PBIS. So with that, then last summer, we really focused on the TFI as we were coming back to in-person, and we started to make our action plans. There you can see some of the things that we're doing. We use something called Tiger Time. Instead of trinkets or other incentives, we really relay this to our SEL needs, and our students earn points and get to do Tiger Time as their incentives. Sorry, they're talking on the walkie-talkie too. We also use that through Class Dojo. We are proud to say that we have our whole staff utilizing Class Dojo to earn points instead of passing out tickets. That was one of our biggest goals this year, and we were so excited to do that. We do in-house data collection, just even for those kids that come to the office just for a little timeout. My principal and I keep track of that information along with the counselor, just to see, we may not be reporting those in our computer system, but we keep track just to see what those behaviors are, to see what we need to do to help all our students. We do have, and this is something that came up in our TFI walkthrough. Heidi will be excited about that, and Frank. We do have a PBIS orientation for new students that come to the building. We are a very transient building. So every new student that comes, and matter of fact, that was our counselor was trying to get who was coming today, they'd get a orientation through the counselor of what our PBS looks like, what our expectations are at our building, everything that they need to know. They get a folder with all of the stuff in it. They get a zones of regulation chart. Everything that we implement here, our counselor goes through it with them. And we also talk with the parents as well. And we are examining the Tier 2 programming. And our team, we're very excited to say that our team is going to the national conference in San Diego in a few weeks. We have 4 members going there. So we're really excited about that. And then this summer, of course, we're going to really focus more on that action planning and dig even deeper. So my co-leader, Jen Ramon, who is one of our emotional disturbance teachers, who also has a really thick background in PBS, is going to talk to you about our next steps.
Hi, everybody. So this past fall, we sat down as a team and completed our TFI. We did it individually, and then we came together to discuss our results. From our results, we looked at what areas we could improve and what we needed to implement in order to be hitting those targets that we were missing. For example, 1.4, the teaching expectations, we added that PBIS orientation for new students. We were missing that. We looked at using our data to set lessons or goals for the participation in our biweekly recognition celebrations. For 1.5, our problem behaviors, we added a discipline flow chart to our staff handbook because we were missing that visual for our teachers. For classroom procedures, our big initiative was to implement Class Dojo as our data tracking school-wide. We use that data for our Tiger Team rewards and our individual recognition. After we looked at our data from 2020 and 2021, we made some decisions about our Tiger Time, when it would happen on days that we had our lowest attendance so that we could help to boost our attendance. We looked at the increased need for social emotional supports. And so like Patty said, instead of doing an object that they win, students earn the opportunity to attend events or clubs. We've done everything from dances, walks. We have teachers that will bring in, there's pictures, bring in and do a food project. a craft. We have a Hot Wheel science. We've had nail salons, anything that the teacher wants to do to build that community. And we began with our upper grades and then have slowly added our primary classrooms as well to that. And the kids get very, very excited about this. They get to go and do something with their friends, with teachers, with somebody different. Patty. With our feedback and acknowledgement, we really focused on adding that Tiger time. And we have been so blessed by our administrators. They give us 45 minutes every other week. We've also added a staff component of recognition where our admin provide us snacks. They've done recognition at staff meetings. We have community partners coming in to do team building activities with our staff. And then finally, with our 1.12 and 1.13, we've really focused this year on the data to drive all of our decisions. We noticed that when we report to the district, our office disciplinary referrals, those were our majors, and we were not tracking our minors as much. So we developed and implemented an in-house behavior tracking system for those minor behaviors. And that's where we were able to pool and focus our teaching expectations and our learning lessons on those minor tracking behaviors.
And our school counselor looks at that too, and he has developed a lunch group that he takes when he sees those same students in getting pulled for various things that over and over again.
Yep. You go to the next one, Patty. And these were just some of our celebrations that we wanted to share. We have 100% of our teachers using Class Dojo. It took a while, but we got there. We had our first official TFI recently, and we scored a 90% on our tier 1. So we were really happy with that.
And Jen, can you talk about how you guys use Class Dojo, because you use it in a particular way that's in a PBIS ideology?
Right. Our Class Dojo, each classroom is set up with our 3 expectations, which are show up, work hard, be kind, and students earn points through Class Dojo for each of those expectations. So whichever expectation we are focusing on for that 2-week period, we set a goal for them. Right now, they are working on working hard. We noticed we had multiple complaints of students not completing work, so we decided to focus on that. When we first came back after Christmas break, we focused for a month and a half, 2 months on being kind. And so everything that we did was geared around those. Our lessons, our data collection is geared around being kind.
And you guys are not using the negative points, not for the kids to hear and all of that, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Students cannot lose points, and we don't have that.
And they still earn points in all of those categories, but our focus for our Tiger time is usually one of those expectations. We really set that specific goal that they have to get, and they know it.
Mm-hmm. They do. We've also focused on the individual recognitions of our students. We have Student of the Month, and then each month we've pooled the student who received the most Be Kind or Work Hard points, whatever our focus was for the month, and then they received a great hooded sweatshirt. We are happy to report that every Tiger time has had at least 80% of our kids participating. We've had great buy-in. And then our biggest celebration was we had 0 office director referrals from the classroom in January. So coming back from Christmas break, that's always a rough start for us. And we saw a lot of great things happening with our kids.
And that's when we really focused on the dojo points. That's when everybody was on board. So there was a direct correlation. And like Jen said, this is some of our Tiger time that we had. The kids love it. And the teachers, I think, love it more than anything because they get a variety of students. Anybody can sign up to go anywhere. So they get to interact with other students in that. And the SEL that has been in play there has been just wonderful. My greatest success story is when a student in the lunchroom said to me, I was going to be absent today, but it's Tiger time day, so I wasn't. So that correlation of attendance goes with it. And as Jen said, this is one of our this is the most kindness points from January. All of these students had the most kindness points in their classroom. So with our PBIS funding, we ordered sweatshirts, hoodies, and t-shirts, and each student gets one of those. They get big recognition. This is on our district website as well, this picture. So they really like that. So any questions for us? Thank you, Nicole. Nicole is part of our district support team there, so she really helps out a lot. And actually, this was Nicole's, one of her schools that she taught at before leaving. So
very impressed with all the work that you guys have done, especially in such a short time and such an interesting couple years.
To say the least, right?
And one thing we do at pretty much at every staff meeting, we get like a short period of time, maybe 10 minutes, that we constantly share the data of what's going on with PBIS, so that teachers know what's going on and where we're focusing on and why we're focusing on.
Great job. I appreciate you presenting today. My quick question is, are you presenting at the PBIS conference?
We are not presenting, but maybe in the future we will.
Absolutely. And that is a fabulous conference. I got to attend it when it was in DC, the international. That's a great one. The forum in Chicago is coming up in October also, for anybody who might, that's also a good one. So I would suggest the APBS, which is what I believe Patty and Ramon, or Jen's team, is going to. And then the PBIS forum is always in Chicago, and that's always like in October. So those are two really, really good ones. So I'm excited you guys are going to get to go. It was fabulous. It inspired me when I went to that one. So I hope you guys have the same response to it and the same reaction that I did. Any last questions? Because we're going to throw it over to Michelle from Layton to talk about her process for TFI.
Not a question, but just a comment for Patty and the team. Just wow. Like, I think everybody, I share the same sentiment. You guys are doing such great work over there in Akron. And I'm just like listening, kind of taking some notes, but great work. And it's just awesome to, see what PBIS can do for kids and for staff. I've been in a few different districts, and it's just so important, with the SEL component. And so it makes my heart smile as I'm listening here to all the great stuff that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing.
It's amazing that they chose that Monday. I'm not sure if they were talking about that Monday was a day that was a concern for attendance. So they put that Tiger Time on Monday, and now the kids want to come to school. So it's actually increasing their attendance, which I thought was a fabulous, fabulous use of the framework. So thanks again, ladies. And if questions come up, please feel free to use the chat. Michelle, I'm going to throw it to you, and you just tell me how you want to navigate the slides.
Heidi, I was going to say one more quick thing is, I know there's a lot of intentionality in this work and their use of data. If you could, I don't know what their action planning looks like, but sharing that out with other schools who are trying to navigate this work might be a great way to just help spread the success that their team has had. Everything from how they're using data to how they're putting those pieces in place, because I'm sure their buy-in around PBIS has increased. So great job. And just sharing that work has been a great thing to hear.
Thanks, Melanie. Melanie is another PBIS consultant at the regional level who does this work as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
So good morning, everybody. I'm glad, the wonderful world of technology that I got mine to work here. So I am Michelle Neisen. I'm the principal at Layton Elementary School in the Aurora City School District. And this is actually my third district that I've been in. I started my career in Fairport Harbor out in Lake and Jogga County for about 15 years. Then I spent 2 years at Jogga County at Cardinal Local Schools. And now I am the proud principal of Layton Elementary in Aurora. And I am so happy to say, just to share a little bit about my trajectory in Fairport. It was just such a beautiful blessing. We were actually really felt very strongly, every district I've been in, strongly about that SEL component and that whole child approach to education. So out in Fairport, I was very blessed to be a part of a school in a district that worked their way up to a gold standard with PBIS. When I was at Cardinal, same thing. We had worked very hard over the years prior to me getting there. And you'll see as we're talking about fidelity, I'm a big fidelity person. So not just compliance and making sure that we have all those check marks and those check boxes on paper, but rather, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And that's so important for me. And, just making sure that we're carrying out this work in a very intentional way. So at Cardinal as well, we were a gold school. And then here at Layton, they have lots of pieces and parts. Within the building, we're doing so much great work. And our PBIS team, I'm so proud of them. Last year, when I first came to Aurora, we actually earned a bronze for our work in the first year. And this year we're looking at just furthering that work and looking at our tier 2 practices. And hopefully, gonna move on to that silver recognition as well. So I want to thank Heidi and the team and everybody at State Support before we get started, because this is such important work. And I can't tell you how important it is for the kids, especially now with the pandemic. I know we've talked a lot, excuse me, just about the pandemic and how it's, really affected our students. So I think now more than ever is a great time that positive behavior intervention supports comes to the forefront. So today, thank you, Heidi, for navigating there for me, or presenting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tiered fidelity inventory. So thinking about all the work that we do on each of those tiers of support. And like I had mentioned, fidelity is such a big, I think it's a cliche term sometimes, but I think it's a big part of, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And I was going to talk a little bit today about, what the TFI is, how we use it to drive our own action planning, how we've done that in every district I've been in, but specifically at Layton over these past few years with our PBIS team. And then a little bit about surveys as well, how we've used surveys to really get a sense of, and I heard Patty talk about buy-in. I always tell my PBIS team, I always joke with them, I'm like, I don't like the word buy-in. I like the word like ownership. Like, what do we value as a team and what do we find to be impactful? And we try to keep our conversation centered around that. What do we really value and how do we want to drive this work forward? And I find that once we come to that common consensus as a team, the buy-in piece just sort of comes. So the TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, it's an annual evaluation that I'm sure most teams here are familiar with to look at each tier of support. It can be completed more frequently than annually if 70% has not been obtained consistently on any tier. So I've done the TFI in a few ways. In some districts, I've done it where we did it at the beginning of the year and used it as some baseline data for us to say, what do we want to get to, or where do we want to get to by the end of the year? What are some things that we can continue to refine and continue to work on in our practices? And we've always found it to be such a valuable tool. It does take a little bit of time to work through, but the rich conversations that have come out of the TFI are just so important to move our work forward. So it's a tool that we use to identify strengths and areas of growth within, and I call them the systems processes, because it always goes back to what do we have in place to be able to support students as they move throughout the continuum. And there's two parts to that tiered fidelity inventory. One part is the walkthrough. So that's where teachers and students get asked a series of questions, and it all relates back to tier 1. So, we call them our pillars. So we have being respectful, being responsible, and being a problem solver. So do students and staff really, do they know what those are? Do they embody those? Can they relate what those are? And then, of course, are we reinforcing those? Are we explicitly teaching those and reinforcing them as we go throughout the year? And then reinforcement systems such as token economies. I know many schools have them. We use something called Caught Being Good tickets. So through that walkthrough portion, we're assessing the fidelity. Are we doing what we said we were going to do of teaching the expectations, reinforcing them consistently? And does everybody know what we value and what we hold to be true and what we stand for? So that's the walkthrough portion. The second portion is the rubric of indicators as it relates to each tier of support. So under tier 1, that universal design for learning, do we have all those pieces and parts in place, from having an eclectic team that includes parents and students? That is so important I think anytime you have an eclectic team with all of those different people in place, you know, from your administrator to your behavior specialist, to your teachers of all different grade levels, to your school psych, to your counselors, I always say, like, don't ever forget about the kids, you know, the students and also the parents, because their input is so valuable into making the program, you know, what it is, the framework. So each tier of support looks at that. And then Heidi, if you click on the tier of support link. So just really quick, I always like to look back at the triangle. We always look at this triangle as we're talking in PBIS meetings, or we'll bring it up, and that universal intent, you know, interventions or designed for learning is tier 1. We hope to see 80% of our students there. That's always, you know, the goal. Tier 2, that targeted group, you know, 5 to 10%, and of course tier 3, that 1 to 5%. So we always kind of keep that in mind in terms of the TFI and some of those indicators that we're looking at in each of those tiers. Oh, I think we missed a slide. There you go. So that's the, you know, what is the TFI, but why do we use it? So we use it to see how are we doing? How are we doing with that fidelity piece when we're measuring what we said we were going to measure at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 indicators. And then the TFI, we'll look at it briefly. I'm sure everybody's seen it, but just to give a quick overview, looking at the checklist of implementation of those indicators. So I love the TFI because not only does it tell you these are the important pieces and parts of a great framework, and here's some examples of evidence that could be included to show that you're doing what you said you were going to do. So it's also used as a tool to help us create action plans. And we'll talk about, and I'll show some examples of the action planning that we use to help us drive some of the work forward. Scores of at least 70% again on each tier can also allow for applying for state recognition, as everybody knows. So if we were to click on that link to the TFI, and we were to scroll down just a little bit, I'm sure everybody's seen the TFI, and if you haven't yet or you haven't gotten there, if you keep going down a little bit more, Heidi, to that tier 1. So you can kind of see the breakdown here. I absolutely love this annual tool that we use because it gives you all those indicators, as I call them, 1.1 to 1.14, and it gives you a rating system all the way to the right of a 0, 1, or a 2. 0, it'll tell you we don't have this in place. 1, we're getting there, and 2, we've got it, you know, and lockdown. We've got this. We have all the pieces and parts to it. And then in the middle, it offers some examples of evidence to kind of demonstrate those criteria. So when we're going through this as a team, we have a lot of rich discussions, a lot of rich collaboration, and talk about what kinds of things do we have in place, you know, with the team composition. Do we have all those important people sitting at the table with us, you know, talking about how our program is going, how our framework's going, what areas that we need to refine. And of course, I will always tell you that the students always have a great keen eye on things, and they always help us to plan our events because they've got some great ideas when it comes to that. So I won't go through all that, but you can just see the general breakdown of the TFI. We'll go back. So after why we use it, oh, one more. So what do we do with that TFI information once we have it? And of course, the answer is action planning. We have an idea, we have a plan, and then we have the action to follow through with it. So once you have your ratings of a 0, 1, or 2 for each indicator in that TFI, then we're able to really break down those scores into action steps. And we talk about, okay, if, for example, you know, the first year that we had, we didn't have the parent component and the student sitting on the team with us, for example. We also needed to look at our data and be more intentional with our data in terms of making sure we were doing data dives, we call them. So we started doing those kinds of things. So the action steps were translated into goals for the following year to help us support that forward momentum. So if we click on that action planning, everyone's probably seen this template as well. This is just a very kind of small framework, but it basically just delineates what is on the right side as I'm looking at it left side, you'll see all of those indicators again, then your score that you received, and then a spot to just kind of say, what are some notes or what are some areas? And this is kind of a quick stop and jot for us. You know, what are some things that we found in this area? If we scored a 2, that's great. We would still kind of, if we had some discussion in that area, we would note it there. If we had a 1 in that area, for example, I heard Patty talk about this classroom practices, making sure that when we're implementing something with Fidelity, you know, we're all on board and we're all doing it, because that's how we're going to see the best results for our kids. And, you know, we found, you know, we sent out a survey. So surveys are great to kind of say, how are we doing?
Oops, I think she might have froze. So as Michelle is maybe going to try to reconnect, I can tell you that they do use this template.
Learning. All of those, you know, we make sure to teach the kids explicitly those things. So when we did the survey, we said, how is it going? How is everybody doing with teaching these focus skills? You know, we found that, you know, some teachers, you know, they felt like, gosh, we need more time. So the PBIS team collected that data. We need more time. When are we going to do this? We have something called, we use morning meetings, just like a lot of schools do. And we said, you know, during morning meetings, we could also be a great way to tie in our PBIS, be intentional about teaching those skills. And our PBIS team actually created lessons to go with each of our focus skills. And also we created, after getting some feedback, we went back and created little slide decks Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that would help teachers kind of take 5-minute chunks and teach those skills. So it was just an example of kind of trying to help support, you know, or remove the barriers to what the obstacles were to making sure that we were all on the same page in teaching those items. And then if we scroll down just a little bit more in the action planning, the data piece. See, I think it might be up a little bit more, Heidi. Maybe down. There was, it's a data, let's see, oh, right there. So just with the data, we found that, you know, while we collect the discipline data and we do it, we have a system, a Google system that we utilize to look at major versus minor infractions versus, you know, what was the actual behavior? Where is the behavior occurring? Is it in the classroom? Is it at recess? What are some of those big times? And we would use that data to then say, okay, if we're seeing a lot of things happening at lunch and recess, what do we need to do, or what can we put into place to help support in that area? One of the things we do at lunch and recess is we have something called the golden fork. I've done this in a few districts and it's gone over really well. Next year we might do the silver spoon, you know, just kind of switch it up a little bit. But basically, you know, every time the students earn a positive compliment that's very specific in language, very targeted. I love the way that, Johnny, you cleaned up, you know, your area, you lined up nice and quietly, you know, you're following the thumbs up when I know your table's ready. I've kind of worked with our lunch monitors to make sure that they're at kind of level 1, you know, as well as our bus drivers with PBIS, and making sure we're reinforcing that. So all the adults are using the positive language and reinforcing the behavior we want to see instead of the don'ts, or, you know, don't run, or, you know, make sure you put that back. So I think that's a key thing too, is just starting with language, something easy that everybody can do. And it makes such a big difference. So the students would earn those positive compliments. Those would translate into tally marks, and the tally marks would, at the end of each 2 weeks, at the end of every 2 weeks, then we would have a class that earns the golden fork, and the golden fork winners would have popsicles, you know, at lunch or an extra recess. And the kids, you know, are just very excited about it. And, you know, there's always this competition in a very friendly way, but I think the kids get really excited, and it's never gotten old for us. So a great way to just look at your data and say, what kinds of things can I put into place to help support the goals of a good PBIS framework. So if we go back. So also in the database decision-making, as I mentioned, we wanted to be more intentional in reviewing our data and sharing our rationale for focus skills to go along with our pillars each week. So we made sure in our PBIS team meetings and to start with what's called data dives. And also at least annually, we would get feedback from staff via surveys. In my weekly staff notes, I actually have a section for PBIS, and in my parent newsletter that I send out, I also have a spotlight on PBIS. So really as a way to continue to educate the whole community about what it is, what we're doing, and to create that, sense of what we value or buy-in, so to speak. So if we were to click on the PBIS agendas, and I'm just going to scroll down. This is how we create team norms, but you can see we'll scroll down a little bit more. So we keep running records of what we do. And if you go down one more, Heidi, there we go. So you can see here, there's the data dive, and this was part of our action step planning of what we did. We have the building data. We looked at we have a behavior tracker, so we use a Google form, and we were able to kind of pull apart, what are we seeing within our Google form, over time. There are certain months where we also see an increase in student behavior. Notoriously, towards the end of the year here in March, we just saw another spike. So spring break came around at a good time. And then at the end of the year, again, I think that's when students start to get, it's almost summertime and, those kinds of things. So we think, what can we put into place? I'll use the example of last year. Excitement was running really high, and I always, have a lot of fun with the kids. And I remember doing a morning announcement and saying, the excitement's really high, but so are Mrs. Neisen's office referrals. So, we are going to make sure that, we had like a building challenge going on with the wings. And basically, anytime the students were caught being good, or got a compliment from a teacher in the hallway, or they did a great job at lunch and recess, they would just earn smiley faces. And at the end of like a 2-week period, the class that earned the most in the wing, we just celebrated. We have a little PBIS store that the kids, that class got to pick from, and they got a little award assigned to the class. But it just, during those 2 weeks, of course, I don't think I had any office referrals. So again, just using the data, saying, okay, if this is a tough month where we know students need a little extra support, what are we going to put into place to do that? That's going to reinforce, the PBIS ideals. So in this, you can kind of see here where we just were looking at some of our surveys. So we were looking at our surveys, which we'll look at next. And as a team, talking about what areas, what is that staff perception? What areas do we need to continue to grow in? What is the students' perception? What are the areas we need to grow in? And what are families thinking? We also talked about in our data dive, our TFI results that we had in our ratings and where we were headed as a team. And we talked about how as a team, because again, as the lead learner of a building, I always want to empower my teachers, and my staff to be able to lead. So I tell the PBIS team, we're all ambassadors of this information. So at staff meetings, it's all of us helping to support that message on our teams and for the greater good. So that's just an example of taking the action planning that we did, how we embedded it into our PBIS agendas, and how we're helping then to collaborate as a team, how myself as the lead learner helping to foster and empower my team, and also my teachers to kind of take ownership of that as well. And then surveys, a great way to collect student, staff, and parent feedback is really through surveys we have found. So I just included here a little preview of the surveys, and it just gives you a really good idea of how are things going? What is that perception? What are things that we need to refine and tweak? Inevitably, no matter what level we're at or what we're working towards, it always goes back to the core. It always goes back to tier 1. So we're constantly looking at our tier 1 practices. We're constantly strengthening them, and we're constantly working in that vein. So if we click on the student survey, these questions are all from, and they can be found on the PBISapps.org from the National PBIS survey that we used. But basically, it just asks students, how do you feel about school? How do you feel about your school experience? Do you like school? Are the rules clear for behavior? Are teachers, do teachers treat me with respect? Do I treat my teachers with respect? Is good behavior noticed at my school? So it's always interesting to get the student perspective, the teacher perspective, and of course, our family's perspective as well. So the staff surveys and the parent surveys as well kind of run along the same vein. So the surveys as well as the TFI, they can be really helpful in making informed decisions and helping to create those action steps that really drive your team efforts forward. So as you could see in the PBIS, our agendas that we have each month when we meet as a team, we really utilize these data dives and this information to say what is next for us and what do we need to do. And that was one of our goals that came out of the TFI. And again, it can be completed annually or biannually. So to wrap up, just that trifecta, I called it here, is about making connections. So when I look at, and I'm a very reflective person, and I think back of, my experiences and where the state is at with the whole child approach to teaching and learning and the state framework. It has been such a beautiful blessing in my trajectory throughout 3 districts of having been through like a revisioning process within the district. And in Aurora, prior to me coming, we just revised our strategic vision to include 6 competencies. And you can see those in a small version over there to the right. But if you click on that, Heidi, for me. Oh, sorry about that. You can go back. I didn't realize it wouldn't let you have access, but you can kind of see it over there to the right. It basically talks about what we believe our learners to be: critical thinkers and innovative and collaborators and empathetic and balanced and resilient. And those are those soft skills. Those are those SEL components that we want our kids to have. We want them to embrace to be future ready. So when we think about what we do at a district level, we think about what we're doing at the state level, we think about what we're doing at the building level with positive behavior interventions and supports and fostering school climate and culture. It really all ties together. So it's that what I call trifecta. So, having said that, and that's also where we're moving with MTSS, when we look at that whole child, it's not just the academics, it's also about, their SEL and about that behavior piece. And when the two come together, that's where multi-tiered systems of support is really embraced. So with that being said, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody today. Thank you for this group. I have to say it's been such a busy year. I haven't been able to join as much, but I have such a distinct appreciation for the work that is done in this area, and just want to thank everybody for sharing today.